All right, welcome everyone to the last session for the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference this year. Thank you for your patience as we get everyone up and coming. And once again, thank you so much for joining us for this 2 days of conferences, for sticking it out to the last panel. We're really happy that we've had so many wonderful people from all across the state join us. My name is Alicia Gardner. I am a senior policy analyst here at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I'm joined by Carlene Charmelis, um, who's the backbone behind everything we do at the partnership. And we are so excited to have Felicia Adams from the Supportive Housing Center, Coalition for Supportive Housing, Alyssa, as well as some representatives from our state government. And I'll let Felicia do the introductions a little later. But we are here for a supportive housing retrospective. And before we move into the meat of our discussion, I just want to thank the Corporation for Supportive Housing for being a sponsor of our conference. We couldn't have this event without our generous sponsors. We wouldn't be able to provide it free of charge to all staff members. Sometimes municipal staff don't have the budget, sometimes up and coming housing professionals don't have the capacity. So we're really grateful to them and all of our other sponsors for making it possible to have this free conference and free resource for all the people interested in housing here in Connecticut. And with that, I will turn the time over to Felicia.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and welcome. Today we'll be reflecting on 30 years of supportive housing in Connecticut. We're going to be celebrating successes and looking ahead to what preservation could look like in the state. This journey involved many of you, so thank you for sticking with us and your perseverance, the developers, service providers, and policymakers. And together we built a model that has changed lives as well as saved lives. My name is Felicia Adams, and I am a senior program manager with Corporation for Supportive Housing. And I would like to pass it over to my co-presenters to introduce themselves. And we can start with Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Langeth. I'm also with the Corporation for Supportive Housing on our national consulting team, and I can pass it over to Terry.
Well, thank you. I am Terry Nash Giovannucci. I'm with Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. I've been there for a very long time in various roles, but always the underlying thread has been ending homelessness. Currently, I'm the Chief Relationship Officer looking to solve problems. We have a lot to do. We need to improve outcomes in creating affordable housing, preserving what we have, and then focusing again on supportive housing. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Steve?
Thanks, Terry. My name is Steve Dalal. I'm the director of the Individual and Family Support Program at the Connecticut Department of Housing, and we oversee the state's response to homelessness, including housing options like permanent supportive housing.
Thank you all for these introductions, and I'm sure many of you know these folks here who's joined us. So we'll start off with the foundation. What is supportive housing? So supportive housing combines affordable housing with support services that help people who face some of the most complex challenges with housing stability, help them to live independently with dignity. Supportive housing is a data-driven solution that has helped people break the cycle of homelessness. Successful supportive housing improves housing stability, meaning folks stay housed long term. It improves employment, it improves mental and physical health, and it also improves school attendance. Supportive housing reduces and limits the harms that come from substance use, and people in supportive housing get to live more stable and productive lives.
Could
Supportive
we move slides, perhaps? I know you have some great work you've done on these slides.
just one moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so supportive housing is one of the largest federal investments and rehousing programs that's been integrated into local coordinated entry systems, and it has demonstrated a big impact on reducing homelessness. It reduces reliance on other costly systems such as jails, emergency rooms, and shelters. So in short, providing supportive housing reduces the cost on other systems. Supportive housing cost about the same as people remaining homelessness and stuck in this revolving door of high-cost crisis response systems, including emergency rooms, interactions with law enforcement, incarceration, and other emergency housing solutions. So with that definition to ground us, we can move on to the next slide. So for our session today, we're going to take a journey through 4 steps. We'll start with a historical overview of how supportive housing has evolved in Connecticut. We'll look into preservation challenges we face today. We'll explore the policy and funding tools available to address these challenges. And we'll look at some of the national best practices that can inform our local strategies. Although it's not listed on this page, at the end, we will incorporate some of the feedback from tenants that we've received over time about how supportive housing has benefited them and impacted their lives. Next slide, please.
Great. Excuse me. Thanks, Felicia. I'm going to take a second to talk about Connecticut and the national leader it is in supportive housing. But I just want to take a second to say that throughout the presentation, you're going to see a bunch of different photos. These are all the amazing developments from across the state, the supportive housing developments from across the state. So this is a picture of my sister's place in Hartford, a supportive housing development. So Connecticut has long been a pioneer in supportive housing, integrating affordable housing with those wraparound services that Felicia mentioned. These developments serve people experiencing homelessness, mental health challenges, and other barriers that make staying housed difficult. Our model, the Connecticut model, has become a national example, and it's thanks to the collaboration between the state agencies, the nonprofits, service providers, and developers in this state. So I'm going to ask a question to Steve DeLella from the Department of Housing. From your perspective, what makes Connecticut a national leader in supportive housing?
Sure. I think it's some of the things that you mentioned. I think our ability to collaborate with our sister state agencies has made such a difference. A lot of times you think of state government and any form of government as just being super siloed and not being able to think outside the box. This, however, has been a program in which we've been able to look across different state agencies and get leadership to agree to really work to help people get from homeless status into housing. And I think that really has been key. I think also has been key is our ability to listen to our private nonprofit providers as well, because a lot of times they may know what works best for the people that they are serving. So we really try to integrate some of their input in trying to make these projects and programs as effective as possible. And
Great.
lastly, just the
Yeah.
great support that we have from the state, and it's crossed different ideological lines, whether it's Republican governors or Democratic governors, everybody has really supported this. And I think that has shown that when you all work together, what great work or what great outcomes can be had.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that last sentence too, the partnerships and working together. Mentioned a ton of different partners, state agencies, nonprofits, different political parties, different administrations. So yes, thank you so much, Steve. All right, the evolution of Connecticut's model. So this is a picture of one of the newer supportive housing developments. This is Wish House in Meriden. It's a transitional age youth project. So starting in the early 1990s, Connecticut realized that housing alone wasn't enough. So affordable housing wasn't enough. They needed the services partnered with the housing. So the state pioneered a model that combined housing with on-site services such as mental health support, substance use treatment, job training, and case management. This holistic approach has helped thousands achieve stability and independence and to successfully thrive in the communities of their choice. The Connecticut Supportive Housing Demonstration Program, also known as the Demo Program, was initiated in June of 1992 by the state of Connecticut and the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And between 1993 and 1998, the program financed the development of 281 units of affordable service-enriched rental housing for homeless and at-risk populations, many of whom were coping with mental illness histories, substance use addiction, and or HIV/AIDS. So this program predates both the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Service and also DOH, but those are extremely important active partners with the demonstration as well as the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority now. So in 2002, CSH and Connecticut partnered with the University of Pennsylvania to conduct an independent evaluation of the demonstration portfolio because they understood the importance of proving the efficacy of the model for both future funding and the scalability of permanent supportive housing throughout the state. Since the original demonstration program, the state has supported supportive housing through many dedicated funding rounds, which we're going to hear about later in great detail. But basically, this is where funding was available for the three legs of the stool: the operating funding, the capital funding, the bricks and sticks, and then those important service dollars. So this money was all available in one NOFA, an application process. But this model is something that has been replicated and seen as best practice across the country. So to this day, states look to Connecticut at this integrated funding model, taking the capital, services, and operating funding available to developers who apply at once, this braided funding. And it allows the developers and service providers to be able to plan and better understand what they're building. It also shifts the onus of trying to find and cobble and braid all these funding sources from the developers and service providers and shifts it to the funders and the state partners who have the ability to make those decisions, which is so important and leads to the success and the evolution of Connecticut's model. So Steve, I have another question for you. In your opinion, what were some of the other ingredients that led to this 35-year success? I know you talked about partnerships, but what about advocacy and really the money?
Sure. I think that's probably one of the things I did leave out was really advocacy. I was just thinking from my head as a state, employee working with our sister state agencies, but this would not have gotten here if it weren't for advocacy. Sometimes states can be slow to adopt things. So when you look at the Corporation for Supportive Housing, the Partnership for Strong Communities, who really pushed the idea and the model of supportive housing by showing the cost effectiveness of the model, where it can be cheaper than keeping somebody homeless on the street or in a shelter for a length of time. So I think advocacy has played an enormous role in that. And I think advocacy really has continued that, and they keep pushing us at the state level to think more creatively, to think vaster, and to expand our options for households. So I think advocacy continues to play a piece. Funding is obviously always key. And one of the other things I think it was really great with the early rounds of supportive housing was the ability to create the three stool approach, or three legs of the stool approach, which is the capital, the support services, and the rental subsidies. When you combine all of those things, you know that you're going to have a successful program because you're going to get the funding from CHFA to actually build the building. You're going to get the rental assistance from DOH to be able to ensure that that project is sustainable over the long term and can make the necessary repairs that they need. And then you have the case management funding that goes to DEMIS to ensure that there are case managers working with the tenants to ensure that they maintain their stability in housing and they keep progressing forward toward independent living. So I think those are all things that have really made this quite successful. And, we've had hundreds of millions of dollars in capital committed to these projects over the course of 15 to 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And I think I'm going to pass it back over to Felicia now.
Yes, thank you so much. So we do have a poll for you all today. Um, can someone please help launch the poll if you can? If not, that's okay. Okay, here we go. How familiar are you with the state's supportive housing initiative? Okay, we got some answers coming in. Okay, so it looks like most people are somewhat familiar. And that's okay. You know, we're going to spend some time building up your familiarity with those programs and discussing some of the challenges they face, but also highlighting how they've been a huge success. We have 32% at very familiar, 55% somewhat familiar, and 14% not familiar at all. All right, thank you for sharing the poll. So we're going to walk through some of the key milestones that shaped our landscape. So these were the foundational programs of the Supportive Housing Initiative. So Alyssa mentioned the demonstration program. That was the early 90s. By the time we get to the 2000s, we're looking at expanding state funding and partnerships to really accelerate the growth of supportive housing developments. By 2010, we're really focused on these evidence-based practices and outcomes and really refining the approach to become very efficient at how we resolve homelessness in Connecticut. And here we are in 2020s looking ahead to preservation. We know that developments are aging and they require strategic reinvestment. Each phase built on the last phase. And we're going to start with the first one, discussing the demonstration program. Next slide, please. So Alyssa gave us an overview of the demonstration program. So I'm just going to discuss some of the highlights of the program, some of the successes. So Alyssa explained that it was initiated in 1992. It created 281 units of affordable and service-enriched housing for people who were homeless or at risk of homelessness. In 2002, so a few years later, CSH and the state partnered with the University of Pennsylvania to conduct an independent evaluation of the demonstration portfolio. What they found in that evaluation is that supportive housing proved to be a cost-effective use of Connecticut's resources to build healthy homes and communities for homeless and at-risk people in the state. So in the demo portfolio, there were for the 281 units, 444 people were housed. The average age of entry was 43 years old, and 34% were women and 66% were men. Only 38% had lived independently before entering housing. 23% had spent some time in jail or prison. 38% had been hospitalized for health reasons, and 39% had received mental health treatment. Lastly, 29% were employed. Evaluators looked at Medicaid records to identify tenant service utilization during the 2 years before and the 3 years after entering the demonstration program. There was a 71% decrease in the average Medicaid reimbursement per tenant once they were housed. So less expensive services included home health care, outpatient mental health and substance use services, as well as traditional medical and dental services. Tenants who stayed housed for at least 36 months saw their income increase from $500 a month to $639 a month. And that's an increase of 28%. At the time, only 1/3 of tenants said they planned to live in supportive housing permanently. 2/3 of tenants reported being employed or in an education and training program. Evaluators analyzed the sale of commercial buildings in each of the project's immediate neighborhood or vicinity, including apartments, retail, and office properties, and looked at the sale that occurred just before the completion of the supportive housing development up until March 2022. They found that neighborhood property values increased for 8 of the 9 projects. Where property values were highest in Stamford, neighborhood property values remained stable. Development of projects yielded $72 million in direct and indirect economic and fiscal benefits to Connecticut communities. So this shows that not only does supportive housing benefit the people who live there, it's a savings to the state, to Medicaid, as well as a benefit to the communities where these developments exist. And the successes of the demo program was a catalyst for developing even more supportive housing. So I'll pass it over to Terry to talk about some of the other initiatives.
Thanks, Felicia. In 2001, we began the Supportive Housing Pilots Initiative. This was the successor to the demonstration program. It used primarily 9% tax credits and funding from the state. At the time, it was the Department of Economic and Community Development, who's now the Department of Housing. That housing division of DECD committed capital funds, soft funding to complement the tax credit financing that was in place. All of these deals had a service provider partner with a developer when they applied, and they were eligible for priority financing. So there was at that time, a special class one. You could apply anytime during the year and be assured tax credits. So that was very unusual, but it did ensure that we had a tremendous response to creating housing under this initiative. The particular development that we're looking at is Torrington Community Housing Corporation's development in Torrington. It was the adaptive reuse of a former mixed-use commercial and retail building. We created 7 one-bedroom apartments, 4 two-bedroom apartments, and 2 three-bedroom apartments for the community. As I said, every developer came in with a service provider. At the time of the application, it was Charlotte Hungerford Hospital. But over time, partners can change. So the service provider may have evolved based on what the residents were asking for, what they needed, because it's a very person-centered approach to finding services to residents. So if, for example, there was identified, the case managers identified there was a need for, I don't know, more substance use counseling, then maybe they would shift their partnership to include another agency. So it's very fluid in that way. We do still see a lot of that movement in the service provider realm. On-site services were provided for the entire population, even though 50% of the units were service enriched and the other 50% were affordable, so that we introduced an integration model. It wasn't to be a 100% disability development. It was to be a neighborhood. So having services available to all meant that the case manager on site, there was no identity of who might need the services, who was in a service enriched unit. Everybody had access to it. It was very fair and open. Over the entirety of the pilots initiative, 662 apartments were created in 14 developments, and there were additional supportive units scattered throughout different communities in the second prong of the pilots initiative, which was the scattered site model. This too helped address the needs of individuals who were looking not to be in an apartment community, but who were more apt to be successful if they started in an apartment on their own. After the supportive housing initiative ended, the next phase of supportive housing initiatives was next steps. There were 3 rounds of next steps. The last one, I think it was 2005, it started and the final deal closed in 2006. So it was a different approach because the LIHTC unit, the LIHTC dollars, the tax credit dollars were going to all of the supportive housing, but there's a need for affordable housing statewide. So there was a drive to let's see how we can create more supportive housing, but outside the tax credit realm. And we utilized at Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, we utilized what we call 501c3 bonds. So if you were a nonprofit entity with a 501c3 designation, you were eligible for financing to build, develop, create supportive housing. This was also very well received, and we had the support of the state, which made it possible to do this, because no one who took a mortgage from CHFA had to pay it. It was a deferred, forgivable mortgage. So the debt service payments had to be made, and the state stepped in to fill those payments. So the bondholders who expect to have a repayment on their investment were getting their payments. The housing was getting built. It was very successful in achieving outcomes for so many residents and across a lot of different needs. This particular development that we're looking at is Canterbury Gardens in New Haven. It was the rehab of 3 existing apartment buildings that were extraordinarily dilapidated. Many units were vacant. They really shouldn't have been occupied at all. And this rehabilitation, so you're looking at the after picture, is 34 units, 10 one-bedrooms, 8 two-bedrooms, 6 three-bedroom units, and 10 four-bedroom units. So you can see we had really moved into trying to find supportive and affordable housing for families. Often, like in the early demonstration program, it was the single adults. As we moved later, we began to see that there's a lot of families that were homeless, and there was a number of heads of households with debilitating disabilities. And so this was a solution to that, made possible by OPM and creating their um, support for the bondholders, as I say, and DEMIS for their supportive services, again, for 50% of the units. And at the time, it was DSS, Department of Social Services, that had the operating subsidies. Those are now migrated to the Department of Housing, and Department of Housing oversees all of the rental subsidies. So all of the units have rental assistance. 50% have service enrichment, but it's offered to everyone who lives in the development. So again, there's no stigma to seeking services, and people can have all levels of whatever they need. There's a case manager in place. I should also note that in this particular development, the majority of the units were targeted to folks making less than 50% AMI or 25% AMI. So it was really meeting a need in the community. Next Steps created portfolio-wide 769 apartments in 17 developments and in the scattered site, because again, we embraced the scattered site model where an individual may want to just have an apartment in the community and not be in a development complex, but maybe just in a 2-family house. So we've utilized that model quite successfully too. And this is an example of Torrington pilots. This is actually the McCall Foundation providing services for units for individuals with severe substance abuse disorders. And all 4 units are subsidized. All 4 units are for less than 50% AMI naturally, and very service enriched. So they have the opportunity to move on to success afterwards, after they leave this particular facility, this building. The next is American Legion Veterans Housing in Jewett City or Griswold, Connecticut. This was the first development that partnered with the Veterans Affairs, Federal Veterans Affairs, for 2 things. There was a $2 million federal earmark that went to this building for housing veterans, and there was the ability to project-based VASH vouchers, which is Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing. That had never been done in the country. This was the first time that VASH vouchers were project-based. So in this particular development, there are 18 units, and while there's a veteran preference, it's not a protected class. So anyone can apply, anyone can move in. There are 18 units there, And the total development cost was roughly $5.3 million of our investment. The next slide is Chamberlain Heights, which is 124 units of affordable housing in Meriden. We invested a little bit more than $11 million in this development, along with tax credits. And while there are 124 units, it's by no means a 50-50 split like we've seen previously. This particular development was created through the tax credit program. So there are a small number of supportive housing service enriched units in this development, and the rest are affordable. But that has been the new model that we've had to utilize when the initiatives were completed. The best way to create supportive housing after that was through the low-income housing tax credit program. And we've introduced incentives in each of the years since 2015 to developers who will address housing needs of those making 25 or 30% AMI and below, and individuals or families who are homeless. In different iterations of each year, there might be another special population that was the focus. I believe in one year, it might have been 2018, we were focused on families. There was a real need to move families out of homelessness into housing. And so some incentives were added to the qualified allocation plan that sort of lays out the criteria for the low-income housing tax credit program to include families that are experiencing homelessness. So we've addressed young adults, families, have a veterans preference, of course, always individuals, chronic homelessness, um, more light touch homelessness, and there's somebody I'm missing. Generally, oh, I know, early days, it was the individuals experiencing HIV/AIDS. That's not, God bless, not the priority now because the need is just no longer there, I'm happy to say. But there is still a pressing need for affordable and supportive housing across all of the other populations.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Terry, thank you so much for that overview. And we really like to share those before and after pictures
Mm.
because it's always our intent to create beautiful neighborhoods, to create homes where people are proud to live, where they can have dignity and be treated with respect. Also, we want to ensure we are beautifying the communities that affordable housing and supportive housing are built in. And those images just show you clearly the type of work that our state partners are committed to doing, as well as the developers. So the preservation challenge. Many properties are 20 to 30 years old and need major upgrades. So if you are a homeowner and your home is 20 to 30 years old, you're probably looking to replace appliances, replace a roof, replace a boiler. But imagine that on a larger scale. And the cost is difficult. There are rising construction costs, expiring subsidies. We know that utility costs have increased, as well as insurance costs for these types of housing programs. And all these issues combined threaten affordability. If you've been paying attention to the news, we know that service funding is at risk and funding for wraparound services is unstable. And without taking action, we risk losing this critical housing stock that's taken 30 years to build right as demand is increasing. So Steve, can you describe some of the preservation challenges in supportive housing that you've observed throughout your time with the Department of Housing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think preservation is really key because we understand that having houses and homes for individuals who are homeless need to be continued so we can ensure that the homeless numbers decrease over the course of time. Some of the challenges that we've seen really started with those first programs, Felicia, that you mentioned with the demonstration programs, because those were the first built. So those clearly would be the next ones, would be the first ones that would need a recapitalization. And when you're looking at the preservation, what we really were trying to do was ensure that there was enough funding in place to keep those programs going past their 30-year expectancy. Some of the things that we saw in those early rounds were some of the assumptions that were made, while very good, weren't exactly perfect. And what we knew is to keep those programs going even farther than their anticipated lifespan at the beginning, we would need to add additional capital to make sure that the structures of the building were solid, whether it's roof replacement, window replacement, those kind of things. But also, in order to keep it going forward, we needed to add some rent subsidies to that, so that they had the income that was coming in to be able to sustain them in the future. I think some of the things that we've seen lately has been just the dramatic increase in cost of everything, whether it is rent, whether it is repairs, and all those type of things, which is putting added pressure on the projects to be able to sustain. So when it costs significantly more than was projected to do a roof replacement or a window replacement or any other things that need to get done in the building, it becomes more costly, which puts more pressure for us to either recapitalize earlier than we thought we would, or increase rent subsidies or add rent subsidies to those buildings to ensure their stability and their existence for 30, 40, and even 50 years.
Thank you for that, Steve. Next slide, please. So we have strong partners in Connecticut who are dedicated to helping to resolve this issue, and we have two of them represented today. So Steve and Terry, can you tell us about some of the initiatives that DOH and CHFA are using to preserve the existing portfolio?
Sure, Terry, I'll let you take that one because I just did the one before and kind of explained our first round, but I know you're actively engaged in the second round of preservation. I think you could speak better to that than I can.
Thanks, Steve. So we have a roughly 1,170 units across 50 developments across all the initiatives. So as Steve mentioned, these developments are in various stages of need for recapitalization, for preservation in general. And so what we've done is we've started with the oldest, moving on to the newest in providing capital needs assessments to each of these developments so that there could be a clear, identifiable, quantifiable need addressing all across the building systems. So what the CNA will do is provide what you have to do today and what you need to do over the next, say, 15 years. So there can be a dollar amount that we can identify that's going to be needed to make sure that the development is really modernized and up to speeds with the current code and the current mechanical systems and everything else. So we've begun with the CNAs. CHFA is paying for those, and all of the developments will receive them in conjunction with a clinic that DOH is supporting. So DOH has provided 4 different cohorts. Again, it's the same, it'll follow that same path of the CNAs. So the oldest, the neediest to the newest. These cohorts will receive training provided to their chief executive officer, their chief financial officer, the property manager, their board president, and their board treasurer. So there's that team of 5, if you will. The goal is to address each owner's portfolio so that they understand and their board understands the nuances of affordable supportive housing and the challenges that come with operations, and give them skills to address them once they've been set up with the appropriate resources so that going forward they can manage things in a hopefully more long term than what we've had before. So the goal is to identify first the capital needs and then the operating needs. So when they go through the clinic and each owner looks at their own portfolio, because in the supportive housing world, maybe one owner has 4 developments of supportive housing, or maybe they just have one. But whatever they have, they're going to look at it across what they own and figure out why was one more successful than the other? How can we, address, say, the fact that rents don't keep up with expenses? Um, DOH has been fabulous with making sure that the subsidies are appropriate for the developments, but sometimes that's not enough because taxes go up and insurance goes up, and it's like astronomical what is happening with insurance. And so, sometimes the rents just don't quite cut it. So we need to provide an operating reserve. We did this early on with the demonstration program, and Steve participated in that first recapitalization to refurbish their operating reserves. But this time, we want to make sure that we're putting it out for the long term, so that maybe it's another 40 years of success, that we don't have to look at it again. If we have all the capital needs met, the operating needs met, the owners are all understanding what the system looks like and how they can be most successful. And then ultimately, the residents see more success. So we're very excited about this preservation effort. CHFA and DOH are working with a consultant from NeighborWorks who has designed a program that helps developers understand what it means to operate housing. Because a lot of times developers do one thing, right? They either are developing or they're operating or they're doing the services. And if you try to do all three, it's just mind-boggling. It's just too stressful. So we're trying to help people understand their roles and when to ask for help and when they need to hire someone and who that might be. So yeah, it's a very exciting initiative. We have, again, the four cohorts. We'll meet in January, February, and March, 2 times a week for 3-week sessions. So and at the end, they report out to each other and learn from one another in each cohort, and then all together. So it'll be a I think, very fruitful learning experience for everyone concerned.
Thank you for that, Terry.
Mhm.
Next slide, please. So Corporation for Supportive Housing is a national organization. We have a presence in most states. And with that, we're able to collect a lot of information about what other states are doing. The National Housing Trust examined 53 qualified allocation plans, or QAPs, in December 2024 and found that just 6 QAPs offer specific advantages like points or set-asides to encourage preservation. So we are working toward helping municipalities modify their QAPs to continue to prioritize supportive housing, but also to encourage preservation. States and municipalities have a broad range of tools to deploy in preserving much needed supportive housing, from set-asides of tax credits to dedicated local sales tax revenues. And most of the approaches are adopted to stabilize properties or grants or forgivable loans. Many developments can't afford to take on an additional loan that needs to be amortized and paid back in full. So even the programs that require repayment offer very low or nominal interest rates, and these continue to help these buildings to stay in operations for the long term. We have some lessons that we have learned from other states. So we know that early intervention helps prevent crises. Blended financing, tax credits, state loans, federal funds helps to create a sustainable capital stack. And capacity building ensures that owners can manage finances and deliver services effectively. Luckily, in Connecticut, we see these things are happening. I can share one example of how one other state is working towards preservation. So Washington State's Department of Commerce manages several different programs to help preserve and enhance the state's supportive housing stock. The Housing Trust Fund Operations and Maintenance Fund and the PSH Operations and Maintenance programs address operations gaps that tend to result in deferred maintenance and long-term property issues. The funds are administered by the Washington Department of Commerce, and the funding source is document recording fees. The initial funding allocation was $47 million for operating grants. So grantees must enter into extended affordability contracts, typically 15 years or 5 years from the end of the existing requirement. And once awarded, funds can be used for operations and maintenance expenses that exceed the revenues of existing rental assistance programs. And this funding is available to both affordable and supportive housing owners. Next slide, and I'll pass it over to Alyssa.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. I'm going to talk a little bit about a tool that CSH created to help with preservation for affordable and supportive housing project. So the project assessment tool is a free, downloadable from our website, and we'll throw that link in the chat, Excel-based workbook that project owners, property managers, or asset managers can use to assess a project's performance by capturing key metrics and milestones to proactively identify a project, capital needs, as well as any anticipated financial gaps. This tool can be integrated into an owner's operational reporting, such as reporting to the board, and it can also be used as a transition tool to help onboard different property or asset manager teams, and then finally as an ongoing monitoring tool. This tool is similar to any other asset management database, but it integrates supportive housing metrics that no other asset management database does. So those metrics are around service funding, case manager ratio, service coordination, and things like that. The tool requires a user to input information on a project's financials, similar to the chart of account, and then other asset management metrics, such as vacancy, turnover rate, evictions, capital needs. And then it funnels that information into a dashboard and grades it against the risk ratings that CSH developed. Each indicator is then assigned a grade, which you can see on the slide. And the grade is color coded, and it allows the user to quickly identify areas that might need additional attention. In addition to the dashboard, there's also a variance tracking sheet where this allows the user to compare their actual financials to their budget or their actual financials to what was originally underwritten. So we're seeing in a lot of older supportive housing projects or even newer ones that the underwriting is not what the actuals are. So this tool allows you to quickly highlight that variance early on before you might be in significant financial distress. The ideal user for this, it's a free tool, so we wouldn't expect people with larger portfolios to use this because they probably already have a service. But this is ideally for someone with maybe 20 projects or less. And it's also could be used for both LIHTC and non-LIHTC finance developments. So really, just to summarize this, I think the link's in the chat. It's a free Excel-based tool. It evaluates the project's financial performance, its capital needs, service delivery, and then long-term sustainability. And it allows the user, it really empowers them to plan proactively and make informed decisions about their assets. And I will then pass this back over to Felicia, I believe.
Thank you, Alyssa. So Connecticut's investment in supportive housing is both a moral and a practical success. It's not optional, it's essential. We have to act together, developers, policymakers, as well as service providers. We can use the tools and leverage partnerships and continue to apply best practices. And let's continue to ensure that supportive housing remains a refuge for those who need it most. This quote from Dr. Maya Angelou sums up why this work is important. It says, "Home is a refuge, not only from the world, but from my worries, my terrible concerns." Okay, next slide, please. And so not only do we have that fabulous quote from Dr. Maya Angelou, we have direct quotes from people who live in supportive housing. So last year, I had the opportunity to participate in 14 tenant focus groups throughout the state. So we traveled in person to meet with tenants who live in supportive housing to understand their perspective of their housing, how they receive support and engagement from their case managers. And these are some of the things that they had to say. Additionally, agencies frequently collaborate with tenants. Agencies have different tenant groups that help to improve programs, and some agencies have incorporated people with lived experience to serve on various committees and boards so that they have opportunities to engage with leadership and help to direct how the program moves forward and improving the lives of the folks who live there. Next slide, please. And this work couldn't be done without the service providers who work directly with the tenants who live in housing. We have a lot of social workers, case managers, program managers that work directly with tenants every day. They're there getting the emergency calls in the middle of the night if a tenant needs something. They're getting calls on the weekend, and their work, it doesn't stop. It is their work that is essential to the success of people living in supportive housing. They directly help tenants to access service and resources. And without intensive case management, some tenants would face challenges with maintaining their housing stability. The tenant testimonial here is from someone who receives case management services from Chrysalis Center, one of the largest supportive housing agencies in Connecticut. This is not the only story. There are many people who have lived in supportive housing and have transitioned to other permanent housing solutions. Some people even go on to purchase their own homes. However, these success stories are not shared often enough. We know that America is facing a homelessness and housing crisis. CSH estimates that the nation needs more than 1 million units of supportive housing to both house those who are currently homeless and to stem the flow into shelters and other systems that are expensive, like child welfare, corrections, and emergency hospital visits. While there are no national data sets specific to supportive housing properties, CSH's 2024 industry survey found that the majority of supportive housing projects have significant property-related challenges, including lack of resources to make needed building repairs or upgrades. This deferred maintenance, combined with the rising costs of property insurance and utilities, create challenges for nonprofit supportive housing owners. The publicized portfolio failure of the Skid Row Housing Trust in Los Angeles offered a stark wake-up call. Without attention and action, communities will struggle to preserve existing supportive housing. Supportive housing owners can't raise rents to cover expenses the same way that market rate owners can. In July 2025, Enterprise Community Partners released a report documenting the needs of 20 nonprofit-owned supportive housing sites in Los Angeles. The authors found an average of $15,000 per unit in deferred maintenance. These challenges extend beyond supportive housing. The Picture of Housing Preservation report found that 71,000 affordable rental units were lost in 2024, a year when only 104,000 new units were created. Preserving the existing stock of supportive housing is essential as we work to address the housing supply problem, pushing people into homelessness and keeping them there longer. So with that being said, I want to offer my colleagues any last thoughts or words before we wrap up for today.
I do just want to give a huge shout out to Corporation for Supportive Housing, who has been an unfaltering, unwavering partner with the Interagency Committee for Supportive Housing, the only nonprofit philanthropic type of partner that we have in this private-public collaborative. And they have truly done so much to further supportive housing and the advocacy role that they play and the financing that they provide and the support for emerging developers. It's just unprecedented, and we really, really appreciate them.
Thank
And
you so
I would
much,
like to
Terry.
say that we really need to acknowledge the importance of supportive housing, both in a development model as well as a scattered site, in terms of reducing and ending homelessness. Right now, supportive housing is being under attack by the federal administration for reasons that I am unsure of, but I have my suspicions. It's clear when you give somebody a place to live and provide that with case management services, the chances of them succeeding are much higher than leaving them on their own with no housing options and no support services, or even worse, on their own, forced commitment to either a mental health institution or a prison. And I think it is important now for all of us to stand up and profess that supportive housing is a great intervention. And not only for the homeless, this has worked so well that other folks, like within our developmental disability community, have seen the success because it can take people out of group homes and have them live independently. So we all need to remember this. And even though it are in tough times, we will come back to what is best for the people that we serve. And when you look at that, it is supportive housing.
Amen to that, Steve.
I don't think I can follow that, Steve.
Yeah. So thank you all for your time today. This was recorded. It will be available, I believe, on YouTube. We put the link in the chat for the project assessment tool if you want to evaluate some of the projects from your own portfolio. We appreciate you being here today. And, my ask to everyone is to continue with the advocacy at the state and federal level to support supportive housing, making sure that we are really ending homelessness permanently.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you all so much. And I believe I'm passing it back to, let me see, Alicia.
Hi. Um, there's really nothing to add. This was such a fantastic panel. Thank you so much for your expertise, for your wisdom, for your work that goes on um, every other time. That's not this hour where you're sharing with us. We're really appreciative of the work that you all do to make this model such a great example in Connecticut. And thank you to everyone who participated in the conference. We hope to see some of you at our reception tonight, this evening at the Lyceum in Hartford. If you haven't had an opportunity to complete the survey yet, if you go into the lobby of the Zoom events, up in the right corner, there will be an ability for you to click and tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what your experience has been at this year's Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference, and keep an eye on your email in the weeks to come for links to all of the recordings. Thank you so much.